When I got up, I thought I had died and gone to hell. They blew up the mountain. They buried us. They buried themselves.
Oh, God. Mateo.
I had to find him. So I went down into that hell. It was my only choice.
Hello, Warfighters. War is hell. Welcome to the next episode in the series where I'm playing through Battlefield 1, but talking about the history of World War I instead. Now, I'll have to admit, just right from the outset, this is kind of disappointing, but in the introductory cinematic in the last episode where they start off with this portion talking about the Arditi and the Italian portion of World War I, the guy mentions that him and his brother were in this unit called the Arditi, and I'm like, oh, sweet. Who are they? So I had to do some research, and I wanted to share with you guys who the Arditi were, because I can imagine I'm not the only person who wondered who the Arditi are. And no, they were not these guys who wore invincible armor, which was actually just a few plates of metal and plowed through a whole bunch of Austro-Hungarians, but they're still super cool. The Arditi, though, was not actually a unit until July 29th, 1917, when King Victor Emmanuel officially sanctioned the creation of Arditi units. And it is important to note that these guys were separate units from traditional infantry. A lot of people perceive them, especially in Italy, as like the first special forces unit. So think about the way that right now we think of special forces units. That's how you can picture the Arditi. You know, they weren't tied to a division or another unit. They were their own separate unit, and for good reason, which we'll kind of explain in a little bit. When a lot of people try to explain, at least from what I read about the Arditi, there was two conflicting ideas. One group would consider them shock troops, and another group would consider them assault troops. And I tend to kind of think more towards the latter, because when I think shock troops, I think the German stormtroopers in World War I, who would clear positions so that way the main infantry could come in behind them. And that was not what the Arditi did. Instead of creating openings for the infantry to get through, they were straight up assigned to attack enemy trenches and hold them for a while. Hence why I think they're more assault troops. And because there's these two divisions, you also have two different ideas about where the Arditi kind of originate from. On the one hand, in 1914, there was a call for the Italian army to create a group of infantry that would operate as explorers behind enemy lines. Not quite the Arditi once we kind of get to the meat of what these guys are. At the same time, too, another group considers the combat engineers to be kind of the precursor to the Arditi. Again, don't exactly agree with it. It's really a combination of the two. All right, so the Arditi are well-trained troops. Like, these guys had their own separate training facilities. They were trained in far more things than regular Italian infantry. For example, a lot of their training was in hand-to-hand combat and fencing. I thought the fencing part was pretty interesting. But it makes sense when you consider a lot of what their primary weapons were. These guys were heavily armed, but when they were on the attack, their preferred weapon of choice was a knife and hand grenades. Okay, so this is what these guys would do. So the Italian artillery is bombarding an enemy position, and while the enemy's heads are down, so in this case Austro-Hungarians, they've got their heads down in the trenches, the Arditi move in literally yards away from the trench. They send a signal to the Italian artillery to be able to start hitting the secondary trench line, the one that's right behind the main line. And as the artillery starts moving back, the Arditi start throwing hand grenades in the trenches for two reasons. One, because the enemy's heads are down, it's easy to be able to take people out with grenades, but also, if the enemy still continues to hear explosions, they're going to keep their heads down. Well, when the enemy's heads were down, they would charge into these trenches and just start knifing and shooting with submachine guns, all this type of stuff, to take out the enemy. And they were pretty effective, too. It's been interesting to see the debate between how effective they were, but you cannot doubt that they did a lot, especially when they were created in 1917 and 1918. So the rifle that the Italian infantry used was not what the Arditi used. In fact, some places I read they didn't even really use rifles at all. When they did carry a rifle, and it was a smaller version of the standard infantry rifle, and it was considered a defensive weapon because when the Arditi would take a trench, their expectation was that they would hold the trench for 24 hours. And after 24 hours, regular infantry would come in and relieve them. Okay, so their rifles, when they did carry them, which was rare, was used as a defensive weapon to make sure enemy counterattacks could be well defended. But at the same time, they were also trained on a whole bunch of different types of weaponry and became very proficient at it. So like machine guns, flamethrowers, all this type of stuff, really, they were trained on so that way they could hold these positions. In fact, on the attack, though, the Arditi were forbidden to use weapons with a range of more than 10 meters. So a lot of times these guys attacked with flamethrowers, grenades, and knives, as I was talking about. Now, even their grenades, though, I understood was relatively weak compared to some other nations' grenades, what they had developed. So these guys are basically fighting in the trenches with their bare hands and knives, which is nuts to think about. But these guys were really, really good, well trained, and obviously so. And they were given a whole bunch of perks. A lot of people in the Italian infantry wanted to be Arditi because they received higher pay, 3 times more pay than the standard infantry. They got better food, extra rations, so not just better food, but more food. And they lived in nicer barracks when they weren't on the front lines. Regularly, they were not in the trenches, except, of course, when they were on the attack trying to hold one. And they didn't carry backpacks. When they had to go to point A to point B, it was all done via truck, and they rarely had to march long distances at all. These guys had it easy. It was more relaxed. They were granted leave more often. A lot of people, again, wanted to be Arditi. It makes sense. What the Arditi did for the morale of the Italian army is just mind-boggling. These guys are legends, and even today, the Arditi are considered legends. They played a very important role in the politics after World War I for Italy, and some of Italian special forces actually use the insignia of the Arditi, which is a skull and a dagger in its mouth, too. Now, because their role was absolutely daunting, I think it justified, the fact that they were kind of given more things, because on a lot of their attacks, they usually suffer 25 to 30% casualties. That is a lot. But some of the difficulties that they had weren't necessarily just because of the role that they were assigned to do. It wasn't just being on the offensive, but when the Arditi were used for defensive purposes, they really weren't trained as well in holding a position, and since these guys were experimental units, a lot of the times the commanders just didn't know how to use them properly. So it's easy to say that a lot of these guys died unnecessarily. All right, so with the Arditi, they had this motto that I think is really, really cool. It kind of shows the teamwork and everything that was a big part of what the Arditi were, and that is, we either win or we all die. Because of the tasks that they were assigned to do, they had to work well together, and that was, also one of the reasons why they had these special training camps just for them. Not only were they taught different things, but they were taught together as units that would fight. Now, the Arditi did have one instance where they did all die after an attack, which is pretty sad. But when you consider how they were expected to fight, the things that they were assigned to do, it's not too unexpected that you would have some instances like that where that was the case. However, on the flip side, the Arditi were actually very instrumental towards the end of World War I in helping in the assault that eventually brought an end to the Austro-Hungarian army as we kind of knew it at that point, and their overall collapse. So the tactical aspect of what they did, while yes, it is argued exactly how much influence they played over the outcome of World War I don't think it can be underestimated, that it can definitely be said that they played a huge role, especially towards the end of the war. If anything, from that morale standpoint that I was telling you about. When the Arditi first became a thing, there were so many volunteers to become Arditi. These guys, as I mentioned, had all these great things. People looked up to them and saw them as the best of the best. Now, later on, after casualties grew and you were getting closer to the end of the war, Arditi changed from being volunteers to people who were assigned to be Arditi, which I guess in that case it may not necessarily be too bad to be the lazy person because I don't like those chances, but I guess when you consider the options of being in the trenches and everything like that, which is hands down one of the most hated things anybody did in World War I, was just be in the trenches. Maybe the Arditi was definitely seen as the better way to go. I don't know, maybe laziness is not the way to go in that case. But learning all this stuff about the Arditi really made me have a far better appreciation when I'm playing this game and who I'm playing as. Because I didn't know this stuff, as I mentioned at the beginning, which is very, very sad, but hands down, these guys are awesome, and now I understand why in the Italian military and in the Italian culture, the Arditi are just absolutely important. These guys are legends, rightfully so. Well, that's going to be it here for this episode. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. More of this to come later on, so make sure you guys subscribe if you have not already. You can follow me on Twitter @_WarIsHell. You can follow me on Facebook by searching War is Hell Gaming. And of course, donating to the Patreon helps me out so much in content creation and making this a great community for all of us. So thanks again for watching. War is hell, but you don't have to worry because warfighters, I've got your six.
I still think about that field every day. I'd almost stopped looking. Started giving in to the hope that Matteo had escaped. And then...
No! No!
He never got older. And here I am, still. Who decides such things? Buon compleanno.